most of the time when I watch a movie, it doesn't leave a very strong impression on me. That is, I'll enjoy it, I'll talk about the themes, I'll talk about what the message was, what I think the good aspects were, what I think the bad aspects were, and I'll think about it from time to time, particularly if it comes up, but it's not necessarily something that leaves a lasting impression, that changes my mood for days, that leaves me lying awake at night, trying to figure out the ethical and moral dilemmas contained within it. And Juror number 2 is one of the few movies that really did that to me. Even now, a couple of days after watching it, there is a very strong sense of unease about the various moral and legal and ethical questions that were raised in it. And there's a lot of circles I just don't really think you can square. And rather than this be a result of incoherent or incompetent filmmaking, I think in this case, it's very much a result of the director, in this case Clint Eastwood, not really knowing where to go with it himself. It's more like him kind of asking the audience, well, what would you do in this situation? What do you think the moral thing is? Because I don't really know. It's also a scenario where there isn't really a bad guy per se. There's a lot of people who have good or bad actions, but none of the people in this film can really be called villains. A lot of them are deeply flawed. A lot of them maybe don't do everything that they should be doing, but they're all very human, and the responses and the reactions are very human. And I think that might be the most disturbing part about it, because this movie has a certain degree of realism in the way that characters act, at least in my experience, than a lot of other films, that just kind of makes it hit closer to home. This feels like something that could and does happen every day, and it is, like I said, kind of disturbing. So before we get into the movie, I just want to give a massive shout out to Clint Eastwood. The dude is 94 and he's still turning out movies of excellent quality. I hope when I'm 94 I'm still lucid, let alone being able to create what I consider to be a truly great legal drama. And something that I think asks very poignant questions in a very smart way. And that does a lot to subvert kind of the whole genre. I think, once again, in a very good way. So, shout out to Clint Eastwood. I've reviewed a number of his more recent movies here. The man is still putting out 1 or 2 movies a year. Some of them are okay, like The Mule. Some of them are not so good, like Cry Macho. But if you're 94 and you get a film out, I think you deserve a massive round of applause. So, Juror number 2 is an interesting film. In some regards, it reminds me a lot of 12 Angry Men because it's about the deliberations of a jury. So the court case in question is that a former drug dealer who's allegedly turned his life around, allegedly hit his girlfriend on a bridge, threw her body off of it, and he's being tried for murder. That's kind of the basic narrative of what happened. And at first it seems pretty open shut. Because you go into the background of it, they were arguing at a bar, they were both drinking, they were yelling at each other, his girlfriend stormed off, it looked like he drove after her, her body was found in the ditch next to the bridge, obvious place to try to get rid of a body. It looked like she had been bashed in the back of the head with a blunt object. There was no other suspects, there was no other witnesses. From the perspective of the prosecutor and the jury and the court, it looks pretty open and shut. Now, I think something that this film tries to, it's not super in your face about it, is in court it's not about proving beyond a reasonable doubt that you're innocent. It's about, did the prosecution prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you're guilty? And one of the characters very early on says, well, they didn't prove that they were innocent. And the guy tries to correct them and says, no, they have to prove that they're guilty. And basically, the other person's argument was, unless they can show, video footage of what exactly happened, then the person should go to jail for the rest. A little bit about law, and just as I was watching this, I was thinking to myself, there's no actual evidence that he killed her, at least in my unprofessional opinion. Okay, they were fighting. Okay, she walked off, he drove off. it's all very circumstantial. Is there any real evidence that she didn't just slip and fall? Like she was walking down a country road in the middle of the night when there was a torrential downpour in high heels. Like anything could have happened. It's there's no actual evidence placing him at the scene of the crime. It's just kind of speculation that he's a white trash dirtbag and therefore he must be guilty. So I noticed that very early on, and like I said, the film kind of plays around with this a lot, that is almost more important than any kind of evidence. And it becomes clear as the film goes on that the police didn't really do any investigating beyond just looking into this one person because there's no other obvious suspect. Now, once again, 9 times out of 10, and somebody says this during the jury deliberations, this would be the case. I believe most murders are committed by people that the victim knows. It's a small town, crime of passion, it makes sense given the past of the people involved and stuff like that. So from like a statistical standpoint, it does make sense. Like what normally happens combined with the circumstantial evidence, for most people would put it over the top. Now, for me personally, I would not vote to convict in this, and I'm summarizing this all. There's a lot of good legal drama that goes on in the courtroom. I personally would not vote to convict in this case because I just don't think there's any evidence that pushes it beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, I've slipped enough times in slush or snow to know that, like, that just happens a lot. So you can't just put a man in jail because he had a fight with someone. Like a verbal argument, I mean, not like a physical fight. So what we discover very early on is that Justin Kemp, who is called up to be one of the jurors, whose wife is very heavily pregnant, was there the night it happened. So he was there the night that it happened. He was at the same bar. He's a recovering alcoholic. He apparently bought a drink. He claims that he didn't actually drink it, and the movie shows us that he didn't drink it, so he wasn't drunk at the time, but he was driving around the road, and he hit something with his car, and he got out of the car to look around, and he didn't see anything. It was, however, next to a deer crossing sign. So he just figured that he glancingly hit a deer, and the deer ran off into the woods, and that was it. He couldn't see anything. But the more the guy talks about the circumstances, the location, and stuff like that, he very quickly starts to realize, oh, wait, no, it was me. I was the one who hit the woman. I didn't know about it. It was a complete and total accident. Unfortunately, though, he goes to talk to a lawyer, and the lawyer says, no, you'd be charged with like conspiracy, with tampering with evidence, with murder, with all this myriad of stuff. The court will never believe that you're not drunk. You just shouldn't come forward at this point in time. You shouldn't do that. And so he's like, so I'm on the jury. If I'm not going to come forward, this guy's probably going to be convicted. And the lawyer's just like, no, just stay quiet. Just don't say anything. Just hope that the guy gets convicted and this whole thing goes away. So that's kind of our first thing. Like, what do you do in this situation? It's very, very difficult. Because on one hand, it was an accident. I think we can all acknowledge it was an accident. I mean, if somebody's walking down a country road in the middle of the night when it's a torrential downpour, and they're probably drunk and swaying, like, there's a very high chance that they're going to get hit. Like, that's just the way it is. I don't think it's his fault if he hit her. It's a tragic accident, yes. But there is no maliciousness, or in my opinion, even really carelessness behind the whole thing. So if he is to come forward, he would wind up doing 30 years to life for what amounts to at worst, a mistake. But if he doesn't come forward, then another man who's innocent is going to go to prison for the rest of his life and be charged with, I don't know, second-degree murder or something like that. So it's a very difficult thing. There's also the matter that his wife is pregnant, and if he goes to jail, he'll never see his kid. He won't be able to support his wife. Whereas the other guy is from a really shady drug-dealing background. So I guess the question is, what do you do in this situation? And what compounds everything is this is a high profile case because it's an evil man who killed a woman who doesn't have any agency. And he has to be punished, and he's a redneck, and he probably voted for Trump and stuff like that. And there's a DA election in the district wherein Faith Killebrew, who's running on a tough on crime platform, is absolutely needs to get a conviction in the case in order to ensure her reelection. So she's put a lot of pressure on the police officers involved. She's playing hardball. She's maybe not being as careful as she normally would be. But once again, it's an open and shut case. So why would anybody worry about it? So somebody has to go to prison. It's kind of the point. There's a massive public outcry. People are demanding blood. This cannot be passed off as a mistake or as a tragic incident. And these are all things that I do notice in a lot of real world trials where very often the court of public opinion or the mob decides guilt more so than any actual legal practice. That guilt is primarily determined in a lot of cases dependent on people's political views or the race of the individual or the political views of the individual, and the evidence doesn't really matter. And I think that's another thing that this film really questions. In English-speaking countries, we have almost this religious reverence for the concept of trial by jury. That this is like the way that you avoid being screwed over by the government, that you are judged by a jury of your peers, not some stuck-up Harvard judge. The problem, as we find out, though, very quickly once we get to the jury deliberation scenes, is none of the people really understand what even the point of a jury is. They don't understand the concept of innocent until proven guilty. They don't understand the burden of evidence. None of these things are really explained to them. And the first couple minutes of the actual jury deliberation I found very disturbing, as I think it's probably how most juries go. So pretty much everybody just voted to convict other than Justin, who's still hoping that they can get a mistrial or somehow this whole thing can go away. Because they have stuff to do. Like, they gotta go, I don't know, wash their car, they have tickets to see a concert, and because of that, it's okay to just put a man in jail for the rest of his life without considering any of the evidence. And when Justin tries to bring it up, all the people just get mad at him. They just say he's selfish and he's just wasting their time, and the guy's a scumbag and he's obviously guilty, so we should just throw him away without looking at evidence. I think that's a very particularly American perspective on how justice works. Particularly in red states, someone has to be punished, someone is evil, someone has to face the consequences of their actions, even if, like in this case, it is very much a tragic accident. And there's massive peer pressure to try to get him to just vote guilty, even though he doesn't think that the guy is guilty. Well, I mean, he knows he's not guilty because he's the one who did it, but you get what I mean. The perspective is doubting that they should throw this man in prison is breaking the social contract, and he's a bad person. There's also a black guy on the jury who's very insistent that he's always going to vote guilty. I think it's pretty obvious there's a racial element to it, that it's like a white redneck guy and he wants to see him in jail as like kind of revenge. Also, he had some family member who died of drugs that the guy's gang was selling. So he just says, like, it doesn't matter if he did it or not, I want to put him in jail. So this is either going to end in a mistrial or a guilty conviction, because no matter what happens, I'm going to vote guilty. No amount of evidence will convince me otherwise. And once again, I'm sure that happens a lot in these kind of trials. There's also a black woman who takes a similar perspective, and she just like constantly screams and nags at Justin for raising any kind of doubts. Now, there's another member of the jury who does actually disagree, and that is a police officer played by J.K. Simmons, who starts to do his own investigation into the whole thing. And he quickly comes to the conclusion that it was probably a hit and run. The guy that someone probably came along, hit her, thought it was a deer, and left, and that the other guy wasn't really involved with it. That yeah, he is actually innocent, and there's some other guy out there that they're looking for. So he starts to go through like a list of different people who own the car in the city or in the municipal area, the same make and model of car, who took their car in for damage repair consistent with the damage that would come from hitting somebody with their car. And so he narrows it down to like 14 people. So there's not that many actual suspects. And they're talking about it. They're not supposed to do investigation. When Justin finds out about it, and he realizes that the cop is closing in on him, he deliberately scatters the papers so that the bailiff can see it. And then the cop winds up being kicked off of the jury for tampering. He isn't held in contempt of court, though. But the various stuff he collected goes to the prosecutor, who's a friend of the public defender that the guy is using, and she's beginning to have doubts. She looks at the information, and she starts going from person to person, asking them about where they were that night, how their car got damaged, that sort of thing. Now, one of the big things in the case is that there was one eyewitness who he alleges that he saw the suspect hit them, get out and look and check, and then drive on. Now, as we find out, the guy was a lonely old man who was just happy to be the center of attention. So the cops just basically told him what to say, and he just lied in front of the court, basically. He just said, oh, well, they're the police. I trust them. We love our cops, our law enforcement. I just decided I was going to testify that it was that person, when really there was no way he could see from that distance at night with no lighting when there was a torrential downpour. So she's like, okay, so their big piece of evidence doesn't work. And she goes to person in person, and she eventually comes to Justin's pregnant wife, who lies to her, although she obviously doesn't believe them. Now, with regards to the actual jury, they're starting to head towards a hung jury. Half the jury are supporting a not guilty verdict, and half are supporting a guilty verdict. So with it completely deadlocked, they decide to go to the location and observe things. That's where the black guy says that I will never vote not guilty regardless of the evidence. It also seems like the black guy is on to him, and he thinks that Justin is involved, and if this case goes on any longer, he kind of suggests that he's going to make sure that Justin gets taken down as well. Justin talks to his lawyer again, and once again his lawyer says, look, there's really nothing that you can do. Someone is going to have to be found guilty. They aren't going to let this drop. They aren't going to leave it a mystery. Unless this guy gets convicted, they're eventually going to track you down and send you to prison. So Justin eventually goes back on his previous convictions, and he manages to convince the entirety of the jury to enter a guilty, to find the guy guilty, and he's going to spend the rest of his life in jail. The film ends with Justin talking to the prosecutor, who has figured out that he was behind it, and they have a brief discussion in using hypotheticals about the morality of the action. Justin's son is, or I forget if his son or daughter, but their child is born, and the film ends with the prosecutor knocking on his door, leaving the ending very ambiguous. I think what Clint said about this film is that it's supposed to be everybody is trying to do the right thing in a flawed way, and kind of the continual like snowballing of all these little issues leads to the entire thing being a mess, and there's no obvious way out of it. Is Justin supposed to take the fall for this one? What good will it really serve if he spends the rest of his life in jail for what amounts to like an accident, like I said? And I don't know. It's very hard to know what you would do in that situation. also, once again, if it's just you, that's one thing. If it's just you going to jail, but you're not going to be there for your wife and your child, and a problem I don't really think that there is an obvious solution to. And the justice system worked how it was supposed to work, and the results were largely not good. It really made me kind of question, though, whether jury trials are a good thing. And it made me wonder if I was ever going to trial, if I would just rather have a bench trial and have the judge make the decision, rather than a jury who just wants to go home and watch the Kardashians. I don't know, like I said, when it comes to rules of evidence, trial by jury, guilt, what the moral decisions are in these particular cases, I just don't think there are any obvious answers. And that is kind of what makes it such a good legal movie and such kind of a disturbing film in a lot of ways. Now, another bit of politics I want to touch on is the reason it's such a big deal is because it's a woman who dies. And a lot of people are like, even if he didn't do it, he let that poor woman leave here and walk home, and she can't make decisions for herself because she's a proud, independent woman who don't need no man. And that was kind of like the what was very implicit in it is because she was female, she wasn't accountable for the bad decision of choosing to walk home in high heels in the middle of the night on a bad road when it was raining. It's like that doesn't even enter the conversation. Like the fact that she might have made a bad choice, it's immediately blamed on her boyfriend. And they say to him, well, you should have prevented her. The fact that you didn't protect her makes you guilty for her death. It is something I just find it's very prevalent all over the place. Like, you'll notice that whenever they report on conflicts, they will still say women and children as distinct from males. And whenever they talk about, like, movie theater shootings or stuff like that, they always talk about women first and the men have to protect the women and stuff like that. And it's just, it is interesting. I get that it's a common hypocrisy, but I do find it funny in the context of the movie, this idea that women don't have agency. They can't be held accountable for any of their own decisions. It's up to the male to basically be their guardian, their legal guardian. But at the same time, we live in a society that's like feminist, and we have to have affirmative action and redistribution of wealth and all these other things. Like, we have absolute equality, we have women are smarter than men, but ultimately they still expect that kind of level of protection and that level of being treated, being held account. Okay, so basically what they want is all the same rights, all the same privileges, and then some. But when it comes to the legal system or anything where they might be accountable, suddenly they have no agency whatsoever and they can't make their own decision. And that was kind of an aspect of this movie that, once again, I found very realistic. Even in countries where women can serve in the military now, it's always just like there's a difference between civilian men, who are viewed often as being okay to kill, and civilian women who are not viewed as, they're viewed as being sacrosanct, despite both sides being able to serve in the military in a lot of countries. So I just found that kind of as an interesting subtext. But yeah, it makes me just kind of wonder about the legal system, because there's no real way to, I think at least, easily reform this and fix this and get it to work properly. So that is my review of Juror number 2. I highly recommend you see the movie. Support Clint Eastwood in his old age. He's continuing to put out the kind of movies I at least want to see personally, and I think he should be rewarded and celebrated for that. So God bless everyone. Have a great day and more exciting content.